Hello and welcome to AI Images. This is our class Have a Coke and a Smile. Coca Cola was one of the first companies to enter into an agreement with OpenAI. Users would generate designs for Coca Cola bottles. Basically, designers could use an image of the can or bottle or logo, and then using a special interface on their website, they could generate images using a prompt window with OpenAI's tools, DALL-E 2 and GPT-4. GPT-4 would generate a tagline or text for the image, and then they would fuse that together and you would upload it as a contest to advertise for Coca Cola. And in exchange for this process of designing this advertisement, you got free access to the tools as long as what you were doing was designing a bottle of Coca Cola. Here's a short marketing video about that process. So this is one of the first forays by a corporation of Coca-Cola's stature and size into the AI space for the purpose of marketing and advertising. And there was some degree of backlash to this. A lot of artists saw Coca-Cola embracing a tool that was built on data sets with artists' work that was not explicitly granted for that purpose. And we don't know what OpenAI's dataset includes, but we know that similar models include the work of many artists who did not give permission or shared work under a Creative Commons license without any warning that they were granting permission to a system that would generate reproductions based on their work or incorporate their work into a model that could compete with these same artists and designers. So needless to say, there's a bit of backlash to this. But Coca-Cola nonetheless entered the space, and it does open up a broader question about the role and the future that advertising has for generative AI. These models right now are marketed as creative tools. They're kind of like a Photoshop or an Unreal Engine, right? You go in, you can use them to make things. But it's pretty clear that companies are interested in using these for marketing and advertising. And it may not just be to generate images for advertising, but also to insert their advertising into the materials that you make. That's precisely what Coca-Cola was doing. In its press release for the campaign, Coca-Cola wrote that it is, quote, still in the early days of assessing AI's potential impact. Manolo Arroyo, chief marketing officer, is then cited in this press release as saying, "We're just scratching the surface of what we believe will help create the industry's most effective and efficient end-to-end marketing model. we will begin to leverage OpenAI's technology in our marketing function to reimagine how we produce creative content, increasing the velocity from weeks to days. We see many applications of AI, including content creation and rapid iteration, hyper-personalizing content and messaging for consumers and customers, and driving two-way conversations with consumers. So let's unpack that a bit. So for one, they're pretty upfront that they are looking at producing creative content using generative AI. They see it as becoming a faster way of generating ideas or even end products, right? They write increasing the velocity from weeks to days. And they see content creation, rapid iteration, and this one, hyper-personalizing content. So what could that mean? We can imagine some science fiction version of this, where instead of ad text written to be delivered to you based on keywords in your social media profile, these keywords are actually fed into something like a generative AI. A marketing algorithm on a social media website might start paying attention not just to the kinds of ads you respond to in the sense of products, but the actual visual styles you respond to. That information could be fed back to create new forms of imagery more or less instantaneously. And we're a bit far from images being reliably generated in a way that is safe for brands. We don't know what these images make. We don't know what they would make. You would see all kinds of random images that wouldn't make any sense if we were to deploy a system like this now. But that's one way of thinking about hyper-personalization and the end goal of what hyper-personalization means in this age of algorithms. Another way to approach it is what was literally on display with Coca Cola's proposals. Giving consumers a tool to generate content that uses their brands or logos. Literally an ad-supported version of DALL-E 2 and GPT-4, free to use as long as you put a Coca-Cola bottle in the image. And this points to a future where these generative tools are underwritten by corporations in exchange for brand placements. That is not science fiction. That's literally what this Coca-Cola website is. In other words, right now, we're used to the idea of going to an interface and paying maybe for that interface in order to generate something. But what's to stop a company from making a deal where when you generate something, 1 out of 5 of those images is going to have a Coca-Cola bottle or some other product in it? So today I wanted to talk about this relationship we have with advertising. And Coca-Cola is a great place to start because they have been advertising for a very long time, and they have been advertising in a wide range of media. And we can start with a very simple one, which is a billboard. For years, Coca-Cola had a billboard, a picture of a can with the words, "Have a Coke," and a smile. That's it. That's their campaign. This was from 1979, simpler times, perhaps. And it's very easy to make fun of this stuff and say, why are they paying $100,000 or more for billboards that say "Have a Coke" and a smile? Obviously, that's not enough to get anybody to go and have a Coke, right? Well, maybe not. Advertising is a billion-dollar industry. It shapes so much of our media, and by extension, our culture. It shapes the way our television is made. We have programs of a specific length with specific story structures that break the story up at points that keep viewers in their seats for advertisements. And that is part of how we tell stories on television because of advertising. Advertising shapes the structure of content online as well. Every social media website or app is organized and built around identifying your habits and delivering ads aligned to those habits. If this didn't work, or if you couldn't convince people that it worked, this wouldn't be happening. Advertising has some effect, or else we would not be organizing every form of media around it. But it's possible that advertising's relationship to sales is pretty indirect. It raises awareness, of course. We know that Coca-Cola exists, even if we've never had one, because we've seen so many ads for it. We see the product everywhere, but it also creates a context for the product. In other words, it creates a situation in which the product is deemed appropriate. When you see a billboard that says have a Coke with a smile, you're not going to automatically go to the grocery store and buy a Coke. No one thinks that. No one ever crafts an ad based on the idea that that's going to happen. But how does it work? And how could AI complicate that? Well, there's a lot of theories around how it works, and I'm going to talk to you about one particular theory. And that's this idea that ads shape associations. The more we see images of a bottle of Coca Cola next to the word smile, the more we associate Coca Cola with smiling and positivity and happy days playing soccer in the sunlight. It's a vibe. You might say it's an atmosphere that is being created for the product and for us to make sense of the context around that product. And this association is consistently reinforced in our heads. The billboard that we see reinforces a television ad. And these ads are not just about buying a Coke and smiling about it. It's not a literal connection. It's that connection between feeling and product. It's about creating an imaginary relationship to the world depicted in these advertisements. When we watch a television show, what are we doing? When we play a video game on a screen, what are we doing? How do we understand and respond to the images on those screens or those billboards? Well, we do it through the imagination. We do it by saying, it is as if I was there. When we look at a video game, it is as if we are Mario in the Mario Kingdom. It is as if we are a character inside the story of Better Call Saul or Adventure Time. These are stories that activate our imagination, creating a space for us to immerse ourselves in. Advertising creates that imagination space too, but then it puts products there. Product placement. Advertisements is building an imaginary world and then putting its products in there so that when you think about its products, you think about that imaginary world and its atmosphere. It's not literal. We are not robots, and no one thinks that we are robots. No one thinks that putting a Coca Cola on a beach in an ad makes you think that if you drink a Coca Cola, you will appear on a beach. Instead, it says, here is a world. Here is a situation. It's saying, imagine yourself at a beach. Imagine yourself walking at the shore. Imagine yourself relaxed, on vacation, sitting on a beach towel, basking in the sun, smelling salt, free of cares and troubles, and imagine yourself as the sweat is beating off your body from the hot sun, reaching for an ice-cold Coca Cola. And imagine popping the Coca Cola can open with that crack of the pop top and that anticipation of a cold, refreshing beverage right when the hot sun is at its peak and you are surrounded by beautiful people having fun and swimming and laughing. That's imagining a story that lures you in, and it gives you certain associations with relaxation, with pleasure, with relief. It creates an interesting tension between heat and cool, right? You want something, you want relief, and so that's why you drink cold Coca-Cola at the beach. And of course, we aren't purely passive creatures. We can resist those narratives, and often we do. We see satires of ads as often as we see ads themselves. Or at least as soon as we see particularly effective ads, you start seeing it mocked, ridiculed, passed around with satirical elements. And we filter our ads through personal experiences. If you hate beaches, then an ad with Coca-Cola on a beach doesn't do much for you. But we are the ones looking at these ads and making sense of them. This is what the media studies scholar Stuart Hall refers to as encoding and decoding the messages of popular culture. This goes beyond advertising and into any kind of media consumption. Information is created and then organized and then interpreted. And along the way, we can negotiate meanings with these signals that we're getting. We can say, oh, that's a dumb ad. Or that's a dumb ad, but I'd still love to hit the beach. Or that's a great ad, and I hate beaches, right? We have all these kinds of personal experiences that help us negotiate those ads. Sometimes this is more extreme. Sometimes you have an ad with a group of people, and none of those people look like you, none of those people act like you, and you say to yourself, that product is for other people, that product is not for me. That's also a negotiation. Another negotiation is to say, well, imagine if that group of people did include me, right? There's all kinds of different ways to put ourselves into these spaces, and that's something that Stuart Hall is getting at. There are all kinds of ways to respond to advertisements, and they are different for everyone, and they are negotiated through personal experiences. Now, with a billboard or a TV show, we don't get to change what's on the billboard. We don't get to decide what commercials run when we watch TV. We cannot make these things reflect our personal experience. But with digital media spaces, we move into an era of personalization. Digital marketing data means that we have algorithms that weigh your response to certain ads and then emphasize similar ads the next time you are on the site. It breaks your behavior down, it breaks down your online interaction, sorts those behaviors into categories, and then it sells those categories to advertisers as a way of reaching you. If you click on a lot of pet toys, this happens to me, you will see more pet toys because now you are in a category of pet toy interested person, right? Pet owner, perhaps. There's all kinds of different categories, and there's all kinds of behaviors that get you sorted into categories, and then people click in and buy those categories, and you see their ads. And interactive media means that your imagination is negotiating meaning from an ad in all sorts of ways. By clicking or not clicking, you are constantly giving information to the system about how you are negotiating it. Even if you are not interested in an ad, your lack of clicking it is information for the system to learn from. So this media is more dynamic. The ads negotiate back. This feedback cycle, by the way, of interaction, video games are built around this principle. There's something on the screen that depicts a world, and we respond to that screen as if it was a world, as if we are there. This as if, right? We suspend disbelief, enter into this magic circle where we can lose our real world self for a bit. We're still there, right? But we immerse ourselves in there. We're half into this imaginary world. And we engage with it, and we interact with this imaginary story. Something happens on the screen. We respond to the action on the screen as if we were Pac-Man trapped in a maze with ghosts. But the meaning we make is something that happens in our heads through the suggestion of these screens and images. That is to say, the meanings of things are, one way or another, in us, not in the things. This is how advertising works. It creates a space, you look at the space, you see the object in the space, and in your imagination, you form an association. And when you think, I want to relax, those associations and connections fire up in your brain. It's not that your brain says, go get a Coke, but part of that wonderful, relaxing moment now feels like it needs a Coke to complete it, to be part of that relaxation, right? If an ad has worked, that's what it's done. It's made this connection that a scene that you are in is really not complete until you have their product there. And it also creates the product as almost a way of tangibly accessing that experience. You may not be able to go to the beach, but you can go and get a Coke. And that's going to complete this experience of sensation of being in the imaginary place. It's part of the vision of a relaxing day at the beach because it has painted that picture. It's made your imagination see Coca Cola in that picture. It's made you think about that scene and imagine yourself in it. And that imagination sticks with you. It becomes part of your inner world. Your inner model of what a relaxing day at the beach looks like is not direct. This is almost accidental. It's sneaky in a way. But that's the theory behind why we are pouring billions of dollars into ads and why our entire media infrastructure is built around creating scenes where your imagination can go, and then putting a product there for you to find. When you reach for that product in the real world, you reach for that scene in your brain. You reach for the context of that brand, of that product. You reach for the imaginary. Those worlds of advertising are constructed in the imagination, and they are constructed for a specific purpose, which is to put a bottle there. And so it's interesting to think about this relationship that will occur when you are not passively watching ads, when you are not simply sitting on your couch watching television or watching a live stream on your laptop. AI generation tools are different than watching TV. We have a sense that we are shaping their content. We feel like it's interactive the way a video game is. You're pushing a button and something is happening. You're seeing the thing on the screen change. Now you have some images to look at and play around with, and now you're pushing other buttons to make other things happen. Maybe this is how image generation feels for you. Maybe ChatGPT feels like a conversation because you're imagining something talking to you and responding to you on the other side of the screen. You're engaging with something that is generating text, and it's telling you stories, it's giving you information, and you're imagining something on the other side of the screen providing that to you. That is a powerful illusion that in and of itself is marketing for these AI companies. Interfaces are advertisements. In a sense, right? We are imagining yourself creating inside the space with an algorithmic output where you are part of a design that's been created to help sustain an illusion. The same way that a video game might sustain your imagination within its world to tell you a story. Now, imagine that everything you create has a bottle of Coca Cola hidden in it somewhere. That's a deliberate manipulation of this relationship. There's product placement in video games already. People pay for you to see things in your video game world. They pay for you to imagine a Mercedes in Super Mario Kart. In 2014, Mercedes had a DLC that you could put into Super Mario Kart and run around in a Mercedes. They paid for that. And this is an interactive world where your imagination is even more engrossed because you are a participant in the game. You're mentally negotiating this environmental space in your imagination, but also with your body. You're pushing buttons. You're responding to stimulation. You're in a world where you are a character, or I should say it is as if you are a character, and you're acting as if you're in that world and your decisions change that world because that is how feedback works. Your imagination is super active, and that's not a problem. Imagination is not a problem. But when we're lost in this imagination that's been co-created with a machine, we're a little bit vulnerable. And these machines have been built by companies, and they're putting things in there for you to buy. So it's really important to be aware of how that works. It's not a problem if you want to go buy a Coca Cola on a beach. I drink root beer, right? That's fine. But what are the associations that are possible when we look at a generative space like an AI image generation tool? And how does that relationship with advertising? How do we understand how we are being targeted and marketed to so that we can negotiate it as fully informed people? That's the question that I'm interested in. Another important question is, what are the things that are being given to us? What are the ways of shaping our imagination that exist in these tools, even if advertising isn't there? Right now, when we look at these images, we're in this creative space. The same way we are with Photoshop. We go in and we are making something. It is marketed as a tool. It's not marketed as content. It's not marketed as an experience. And so what we are doing is losing ourselves in the activity of making images, or imagining ourselves in the pictures it makes. That's one shift that I think is very possible, that it sounds like Coca Cola is interested in, right? Hyper-personalization of content. What are the pictures you want to imagine yourself in? And how can Coca Cola make that happen? Right? That's a powerful question when you're thinking about the connotation of a product. Is it saying, well, where do you want to see Coca Cola? Already, you're in a position of saying, here is where I want to see Coca Cola. You're not saying, I don't want to see Coca Cola. You're saying, I want to see Coca Cola at the beach. I want to see Coca Cola in outer space. So we imagine ourselves in the process of making through Coca Cola. The bottle of Coke is literally our passport into creativity with this marketing campaign. And this is the first wave of this. This is what we are going to see probably a lot more of. And the point that I want to suggest is that we are then getting images that are not fully in our control, but are shaped by bigger, complex systems, that are shaped by economics and marketing and algorithmic data collection, more than likely. And all of these systems are part of machine learning and what we call artificial intelligence, right? Taking data, processing that data, assigning weights and biases. And we're doing this with cultural data, social data. We've seen the pictures of people and the way that people have been described in that data, right? And they're being swept up into this imaginary too. So even beyond advertising, there are ways that these tools shape our imagination of the world. There are scenes and depictions of things that are called normal. When we ask one of these tools, what does a doctor look like? And we get 4 white-haired men in white lab coats. What does that reinforce or suggest about doctors and about the world and the way that the world is organized and how it makes sense to people? We have mentioned this before. I'm not going to go too deeply into this. A lot of these systems are intervening, and they are actually changing your prompt on the back end to add random words that describe people's genders, nationalities, and races in order to diversify the output that the data would give you organically. So there's system-level interventions. Students have pointed out, I've gone to DALL-E 2, I've entered in a prompt, and I actually saw pretty diverse outputs. I just want to say that is because people asked questions about it. That is because people raised concerns. And the tools have injected random words in order to make that happen. Because if you just asked for a doctor and just went from the data consistently, you get, frankly, white men, right? And we did talk about this before, and we looked at the relationship between what's in the data set and the biases that come through. So, again, not going to go too deep into that, but these are ways that we look at relationships in the world that are reinforced by the data sets producing these images. And that bias comes into these pictures that we are making, and they can influence the way we imagine the world or what we assume is normal, and they can reinforce that expectation about the world as if it were normal. Some of this stuff can be pretty subtle, but some of it can be kind of complicated too. So I want to talk about a brilliant article about smiles and culture that was recently written by Jenka Gerfinkel. And it focuses on a viral Reddit post with a slideshow of 18 images generated by Midjourney using prompts. And the prompts described various cultural and historical groups as if they were taking selfies. So the result is something like you see here. A series of pictures of people smiling, imagined by AI from various cultures and points in history. There are 18 of them. We're looking at just one of them, the one on the right. The one on the left is what Native American people of the time period actually looked like when they sat for photographs. And that was also posed by colonists coming to the country and imposing this idea of what a pose is meant to look like. So, the author of the post, who is not the creator of the images, just to be clear, notes that many of these smiles are wholly inappropriate to the cultures and times that they seem to represent in these generated images. And she writes, how we smile, when we smile, why we smile, and what it means is deeply culturally contextual. She looks specifically to the difference between the meaning and expression of a smile in Russian culture versus American culture, citing this other essay by Camille Baker. Americans expect public figures to smile at them as a means of emphasizing social order and calm. Russians, on the other hand, find it appropriate for public officials to maintain a solemn expression in public, as their behavior is expected to mirror the serious nature of their work. A toothy, dominant smile from an important American public figure inspires feelings of confidence and promise in Americans. Russians expect instead a stern look from their leaders meant to demonstrate serious intentions, validity, and reliability. Now we can look at this and identify a kind of North American bias in smiles. And the author makes another really interesting point, which is that the smiles in the training data are not actually people smiling. They are photographs of people smiling. They are people saying cheese, right? They are posed. These smiles are forced and somewhat inauthentic. But the inauthentic smile may seem natural to us if we are American, because it is a cultural practice tied to American expectations of behavior. Smiling doesn't just signal happiness, it signals that you're not upset. If you say someone who is just having a resting face, that's unusual. Your expectation, for example, if you go into a restaurant or a coffee shop or a store, is that the person working there is going to be smiling at you. When you come in, if they're not smiling, you're going to think they're annoyed that you're there because they probably are, right? And if we aren't smiling, it can be sort of suspect. The smile is kind of the expected default. And that's tied to specific cultural changes from a particular time and place. Gurfinkel links it to rationalism and the incentive for individuals to make their own happiness, right? To cultivate their own happiness. If you don't cultivate your own happiness, then your unhappiness is on you. That's an American cultural perspective. And all of this is coming through in the data when we ask people to smile in photographs. What a smile means, why we do it, and when are highly variable. And certain expectations of a user are embedded into generative systems when we ask for these prompts. So Gurfinkel cites another passage, this one from Lisa Barrett. Different languages describe diverse human experience in different ways. Emotions and other mental events, colors, body parts, direction, time, spatial relations, and causality. So all of these are experienced differently in different languages. The diversity from language to language is astonishing. Not all cultures understand emotions as mental states. The Ifaluk of Micronesia consider emotions transactions between people. To them, anger is not a feeling of rage, a scowl, a pounding fist, or a loud yelling voice. It's not all within the skin of one person. Anger is a situation in which two people are engaged in a script, a dance, if you will, around a common goal. In the Ifaluk view, anger does not live inside either participant. So if we ask for an angry person, what are we going to see? We're probably going to see a North American person and that expression of what anger looks like. And while these things may seem small, it is just one specific example of a North American bias that is part of our data sets and the sets of images that we produced with those data sets. And together, that process creates a series of images that stereotype. We've discussed many times in this class, this is always happening when we generate images of humans based on these categories. But it also normalizes and enforces behaviors. This cultural artifact of a smile, of happiness, is now being put on other people. And we read these images that way, thinking back to encoding and decoding. Of course, these images are putting smiles on people. We're asking for selfies, right? We're asking for that. The question is, how do we decode them? If we decode them as natural, if we decode these images as, oh, look how everyone is happy and smiling, isn't that fun? We're reacting to it from an imagination that we already have, an expectation that we already have that happy people smile, and that's a North American bias. And of course, I should point out, this is especially egregious when you consider the history of genocide against Native Americans. Creating a highly stereotyped composite of these images from the internet, compressing them into images, and then forcing them to smile is a wholly inappropriate exercise. These pictures of people from around the world and from different time periods are appearing in these pictures not as those people actually were. That is obvious by now, I hope. But they're also being created according to a specific North American understanding and expectation of behaviors. If we ask for happiness and we see smiles as a result, that is a North American bias. And maybe Western Europe, right? North America. If we ask for anger and we see people shaking their fists and with like their eyes bulging out, right? This is a North American interpretation of anger. It reinforces certain ideas about what emotions look like, about what behavior is appropriate and isn't appropriate, and it does that through a North American lens. And it's not just these images, it's what these images suggest about the entire landscape of images that these tools can create. They are reinforcing one point of view among many, and they tell us that this is the default, that this is the expectation. When we ask for things and that's what we get, we assume that those things are normal and natural and to be expected. That means that the images that these systems produce are most likely going to universalize American culture instead of diversifying it. One of the most powerful things we can learn in this world of AI is media literacy. How can we understand what an image is telling us? Where its information is coming from? Who is shaping that information? Is it a company? Is it a cultural consensus? Is it a set of cultural expectations and biases? Is it the norm of how your family did things that helps you decode these images, right? Does it align with something in your experience? Is that the way that you decide that something is normal? Is it the norms of your city, your country, a particular political ideology that say this is the way that things look? This is the way that behavior manifests in people. This is what scenes look like when we ask for them to be rendered by an AI. Is it reflective of an attempt to sell you something? Are these pictures reinforcing myths about the world? Are they reinforcing myths about technology? These are important questions to ask. Some of these questions are embedded not just in the images, but in the entire idea of making them. Is it reinforcing, for example, that technology can be creative in and of itself if we say that these are AI-generated images? A person is pushing that button. So what happens when we say the AI made it? Are we then shifting accountability for the images we make and share to a machine? Are we shifting responsibility and accountability away from the companies that make these tools when we say the AI made these images? Shouldn't we be more specific and say Stable Diffusion is made by Stability AI, right? And that Stability AI made this tool that made this image? What happens when we use that shorthand, that an AI made that image? Who gets removed from that process, right? And who does it help? Does it enforce this idea that the AI has some sort of sentience or personality, that it has agency, that it is capable of creativity? One example is that ChatGPT refers to itself as an I. So we can ask, here we go, ChatGPT, tell me about yourself.
As an AI language model, I don't have a physical body or personal experiences, but I'm designed to understand and respond to human language in a natural and engaging way. I have been trained on a large corpus of text from the internet, books, and other sources, which allows me to understand and generate text on a wide range of topics. My primary function is to assist users in generating human-like responses to their queries or inputs. I can be used for a variety of tasks, such as answering questions, generating text, completing sentences, translating languages, and more. I am constantly learning and improving through interactions with users and the data I'm trained on. My aim is to provide accurate, informative, and helpful responses to your inquiries.
So why do you call yourself an I if you don't have a body or personal experiences?
As an AI language model, I use the pronoun I to refer to myself, because it is a convention used in human language to denote the speaker or writer. While I don't have personal experiences or consciousness, I am designed to simulate natural human conversation and engage with users as if I were a person. Using I helps me communicate more effectively and makes it easier for users to interact with me in a more natural way.
Okay, so there we have it, right? It is telling us I am designed to simulate natural human conversation and engage with users as if I were a person. Using I helps me communicate more effectively and makes it easier for users to interact with me in a more natural way. So this I is doing two things. First, it's offering users a reference point to make sense of how to navigate this system. That's pretty common with new technologies, and if you do interaction design, this stuff is probably pretty important to pay attention to, right? You need to move the user from uncertainty about how to use an interface, how to interact with an interface, toward a model, a mental model of how that interface works. And you do that by referencing commonly understood ideas about the world that pre-exist. In this case, OpenAI is referencing personhood. And at the same time, this choice of referring to itself as an I is reinforcing a frequently misunderstood idea about what an artificial intelligence system is. It suggests that ChatGPT has a sense of selfhood, which is not true. But personification makes it very easy to understand how to use it. Interfaces obscure realities about how systems work in order to make them easier to use. But at the same time, it's tapping into pre-existing understanding of things and how they work, and it's perpetuating these simple models of the world in ways that can sometimes be more confusing in the broader picture. In this example, it's easier for us to use ChatGPT in a chat window and to have a system refer to itself as I, and for us to say things like it's thinking. These are shortcuts that help us learn how to use the system. But the system is more complex beneath the hood, and over time, if we accept these simplifications as reality, we lose track of what's actually happening. And so today, you have people who think these machines really are people, that they are sentient, human-created creatures. Or they give the illusion that self-aware machines are going to happen in a year or two, when realistically we are nowhere near it. This is a design choice, and my key point is not whether it's a good or a bad decision. My point is that it is a decision. It's a decision that someone made to shape your imagination in order to relate to this screen interaction in a very specific way, which is that you will talk to it as if it is a person. That's what they want, a personal assistant. They want you to think of ChatGPT as a personal assistant. And this isn't some secret. This is right there in the window. If you ask ChatGPT, it tells you this, right? It's in that conversation I just had. Media literacy is about understanding the decisions that go into things that you watch, the interfaces that you use, the games you play, any designed thing that you interact with. For example, we talked before about how the buttons for Midjourney and Stable Diffusion are not labeled generate pixel data into an assemblage resembling this prompt. That's unwieldy, right? but they put a button there that says dream, or they ask you to type imagine into a chat box window. And when you label the interactions that way, you have something else going on. It's designed to make it accessible to new users, and it's designed to give you a sense of orientation between a system that you don't understand and something that you do. But intentionally or not, it shapes the relationship that you have with what the system is doing. It gives you a guiding framework or a metaphor to make sense of a complicated system. And in the meantime, it reinforces this idea that the data being processed behind the screen has some kind of resemblance to a human mind, which is simply not true. It's a simplification, it's a design, it's a decision. It's a label assigned to a button. And those words are suggesting something about the system that doesn't really describe anything about what it is doing or how it works. You hit the dream button, it is not dreaming. These little shorthands can also reference kind of weird assumptions that we have. One of the big criticisms of Alexa and a lot of these early sort of voice-activated personal systems is that they were all women. And the question was, why? What was it about a woman's voice that made people feel comfortable telling it what to do or asking it for information, right? Why was that the thing that we were given as a way of navigating and introducing ourselves to a button-free interface? And there was a lot of thinking around why that was. But I also want to point out that even this phrase, artificial intelligence, is loaded up with shorthands that uncomplicate complicated systems at the expense of understanding them. The term artificial intelligence creates a lack of nuance, and they offer us ways of quickly understanding a category of systems, and it creates frames that we internalize, and everything that comes after that frame is compared to that understanding and incorporated through that frame. In a review of an exhibition of art made with artificial intelligence, now I'm going to be self-conscious about using that term, that was written in the Brooklyn Rail, Charlotte Kent writes, Emily Tucker, the executive director at the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law, announced in spring 2022 that the center would no longer use the terms AI, artificial intelligence, or machine learning because those terms obfuscate, alienate, and glamorize. She urges users to identify the operating system of their practice, which is why artists often distinguish what softwares they use and why. This specificity has a politics. The term artificial intelligence was coined at MIT, but according to Herbert A. Simon in The Sciences of the Artificial from 1969, researchers at Carnegie Mellon preferred complex information processing. How much clearer that term is. How much less frightening is the notion of complex information processors. Tucker continues that we are ignorant about and deferential to the technologies that increasingly comprise our whole social and political interface is not an accident. Whenever we are using someone else's words to explain what's happening on a screen or in a computer program or in the world, it can be helpful to ask questions about where that language came from, who came up with that language, what it hides, what it reveals, and why we are using it. Does it describe things accurately? Does it shape our thinking about whether or not the systems think for themselves, for example? Or whether or not the systems are objective? We know that they don't. We know that they aren't. They don't think for themselves, and they aren't objective, right? We know that. But some of these frames are set up as a kind of shorthand that creates a metaphor, and we can easily start thinking using those metaphors to make sense of additional information about those things. And when we do that, things that exist in reality but don't fit the metaphor can become harder to visualize or integrate into our understanding. These metaphors are designed to simplify. The imaginary stories we tell in ads and video games and in interfaces do not tell you anything about the system. And why would they? We want immersive experiences and stories. We don't want to look at wireframes and math. The artist duo Jody did this. They stripped all the imaginaries out of Doom. And you can see what these codes look like when they're stripped bare. This is why we have imaginaries in the first place. We like imaginaries. We want to imagine. But it's really important to think about and be aware of and respond appropriately to that when other people's imaginations are offered to us. Nobody pushes the dream button and thinks they're seeing real dreams. And none of this is an argument against simplicity per se. Not an argument about making things easier to understand, and it is not an argument for revealing everything all the time. Sometimes transparency can be daunting to a user. Sometimes transparency of how these systems work, complicated systems, can actually alienate a user from using them. That's the last thing you want. But having that information there and thinking carefully about how things are labeled and identified is the responsibility of designers, which some of you may someday be doing. And being aware of that relationship is also an excellent tool for us to have as consumers. To ask why the AI is designed with a particular mythology at the expense of other metaphors and stories. Why were these chosen? What metaphors are in play, and why were they chosen? In the future, advertising may just be us going into a space where we want to be creative and being told that we can be creative for free if we put these ads in, if we put this product into our imagination, and then the advertisement is built. We are making our own advertisements, right? Where brands and icons and even ideologies are embedded into them. It might be obvious and it might be subtle, but either way, it's worth looking for so that we can make our own decisions about the relationships we want to have with it. It's about engaging with the world and with tools and with interfaces and software with intention. And on that note, thanks. I will see you in our next class.
I'd like to buy
Thanks again.
the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I like to teach the world to sing with me.